40 years ago, she walked away from me. No goodbye, no look back, just left. I still remember the way she said she needed more money, more comfort, more life. I had nothing then. Just a heart full of love and hands too empty to hold her dreams. She left with him, a man who could buy her the world. I watched that car disappear, and I thought that was the end of my story. I was wrong. It was only the beginning. People like to say time heals everything. It doesn't. It just hides the pain behind a stronger face. I worked, I built, I clawed my way out of the dirt until one day, I wasn't the poor boy she left. I was the man she'd come looking for. 40 years, and now she's back. Same face, different eyes. Life caught up with her. The same life she thought she could buy. She left me for a rich man. But guess who's rich now? The morning air was cold and heavy, as if the sky itself knew something terrible was about to happen. A gray light slipped through the half-open window, brushing against the worn curtains that barely moved. He sat at the small wooden table, his hands trembling as he held a cup of bitter coffee. Across the room, she stood silently, packing her last few things. Not a word, not a glance. The clinking of her jewelry sounded louder than his heartbeat. He wanted to say something, anything, but his throat felt locked. When she finally spoke, her voice was sharp but shaky. I can't live like this anymore. The cup in his hand felt suddenly too heavy to hold. And just like that, he knew she was leaving for good. Rain began to tap softly against the window, each drop echoing the weight in his chest. He followed her to the door, watching her slip on her heels, the same pair he bought with his last paycheck. She looked beautiful, but her eyes had already turned cold. "You'll never make it, Daniel," she said quietly, not out of cruelty, but certainty. "You dream too much." And dreams don't pay the bills. He wanted to grab her hand, to beg her to stay, but pride froze him in place. Outside, a black car waited, polished, expensive, driven by the man she chose over him. When she opened the car door and glanced back one last time, her expression was unreadable. Was it guilt or relief? The car door shut, and the sound felt like a gunshot to his soul. The rain turned into a storm soon after she left. Thunder rolled across the sky as Daniel stood by the window, staring at the empty street. Her laughter, the one he used to wake up to, now echoed only in his memory. The apartment felt haunted, filled with ghosts of promises and half-packed dreams. He picked up her forgotten scarf from the chair, pressing it against his face. It still smelled like her perfume, sweet, distant, fading fast. Somewhere deep inside, anger began to rise, mixing with sorrow. "One day," he whispered to the empty room, his voice low and trembling, "you'll see who I really am." Outside, lightning struck and the power went out. Only darkness remained, and in that darkness, a vow was born. The city at night was unforgiving. Dark alleys, broken streetlights, and the faint hum of passing cars. Daniel walked home after another exhausting shift at a small mechanic's garage, his clothes soaked in oil and sweat. His hands were rough, scarred from years of hard work, yet his pockets remained nearly empty. He lived in a small rented room above a noisy bar, where the sound of laughter below mocked his quiet loneliness. Every night, he lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling, thinking of her, wondering if she was happy in her world of silk and gold. The pain twisted inside him, sharper than hunger. But even in that pain, something burned, a small, stubborn flame refusing to die. He whispered to the darkness, "Someday, I'll make it." "You'll see." And the night, silent and endless, seemed to whisper back, "Prove it." Days blurred into months. Daniel worked 3 jobs, fixing engines by day, cleaning restaurants by night, and studying old business books when he could barely keep his eyes open. The city treated him like a ghost, invisible among the noise and neon lights. Sometimes he skipped meals just to save a few dollars. Other times, he stared at shop windows filled with things he could never afford, watches, suits, and promises of a better life. But inside, he was changing. The boy who once believed in love was gone. A man forged in hardship was taking his place. "You'll never make it," her words echoed in his mind like a curse. And every time he heard them, he pushed harder until they began to sound like fuel, not failure. Still, a question haunted him each night. Was he chasing success or revenge? One evening, while closing the garage, a wealthy old customer noticed Daniel's skill. "You've got a good hand, son," the man said, inspecting the freshly repaired car. "Ever thought about starting something of your own?" Daniel laughed softly, almost bitterly. "With what money?" But the man only smiled, leaving his business card behind. "Opportunity doesn't always knock twice," he said, before driving off into the rain. Daniel stood there, drenched and trembling, staring at the card. For the first time in years, he felt something shift, like the world had cracked open just enough to let a little light in. He slipped the card into his pocket, heart pounding. The storm above thundered again, but this time it didn't sound so hopeless. The old man's business card sat on Daniel's desk for weeks, slightly bent, ink smudged at the corners. Every night he picked it up, turning it over in his hands, wondering if it was real or just another cruel tease from life. Finally, one morning he called. The old man's voice was calm, confident, and oddly warm. "If you're serious, meet me tomorrow." I like people who aren't afraid to start small. Daniel arrived early, wearing his only clean shirt, his heart hammering in his chest. The old man, Mr. Halden, offered him a partnership. Small, risky, but honest. "You do the work. I'll provide the tools," he said. Daniel hesitated, thinking of how badly he'd been broken before. But then he remembered her last words, "You'll never make it." He looked up and said, "Let's begin." The early days were brutal. Daniel worked 16 hours a day, fixing cars, delivering orders, sleeping in the garage when he was too tired to walk home. The smell of oil and metal became the scent of his new life. Sometimes he'd wake up to find frost on the windows, the cold biting in his skin, yet he never complained. Mr. Halden would occasionally visit, watching him work in silence, then nodding approvingly. "You've got fire in you, boy," he'd say. Slowly, customers started returning, spreading his name through word of mouth. His small workshop began to hum with life, engines roaring, sparks flying, phones ringing. One evening, as he locked up, he looked at the city lights from across the river. For the first time, he felt like the city was finally looking back at him. Months turned into years, and the business grew. One garage became 3. Daniel no longer walked to work. He drove an old pickup truck with his name painted proudly on the side. One afternoon, while balancing the books, he realized something shocking. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was winning. The thought made his hands tremble. He poured himself a drink, staring out the window at the sunset bleeding across the skyline. But as he lifted the glass, a strange chill ran through him. In that same city, not too far away, she was living her dream. In silk and luxury, surrounded by people who never struggled like he had. He whispered to the wind, "One day, I'll see you again." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the reflection of his own eyes in the glass looked darker than ever before. It was late evening when Daniel heard the knock on his office door. The workshop was empty, silent except for the faint ticking of a cooling engine. He opened the door to find a tall man in a tailored suit, the kind Daniel once used to envy. "Mr. Reed?" the man asked with a professional smile. "My name is Carter. I represent a client interested in expanding into the automobile business." Daniel offered a firm handshake, though his palms were slick with sweat. They sat across from each other, two men, one polished, one still scarred by years of struggle. "You built this from nothing," Carter said, flipping through his file. "That's rare." "My client wants to invest in rare things." Daniel didn't know it yet, but this meeting would change everything. The hum of the city outside suddenly sounded like destiny whispering through glass. Within months, Daniel's business transformed. New machines arrived, new branches opened, and his name appeared in trade magazines. Cameras flashed, journalists wrote about the mechanic who became a millionaire. The sound of applause replaced the clanging of tools. Yet, beneath the praise, Daniel stayed eerily calm, like a man waiting for a storm he knew was coming. At every event, he carried himself with quiet power, polite but distant, eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for something. Or someone. At night, he'd return to his empty penthouse, pour himself a drink, and stare at the city lights that used to mock him. He thought about her sometimes, not with love, but with unfinished silence. "What would you think," he murmured one night, "if you saw me now?" The answer came only as a flicker of lightning far off in the dark sky. One morning, Daniel opened a newspaper article about a grand charity ball hosted by the elite, the kind of people who used to look down on him. His eyes froze on a name he hadn't seen in decades. Lydia Thompson, her married name. Her husband, the same rich man she had chosen, was mentioned beside her, celebrated for his business empire. Daniel felt something stir deep inside. Not love, not hate, something colder. He folded the newspaper carefully, almost ceremonially. "So, you're still out there," he whispered. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and looked at his reflection in the glass door. The man who stared back wasn't the same broken soul she once left. He smiled faintly and said, "Then the game isn't over yet." And somewhere thunder rolled, soft but promising. Time became Daniel's silent servant. 20 years passed like scenes in a film. Champagne, contracts, handshakes, and applause. He owned buildings now, companies, fleets of cars that bore his name in shining chrome. But in every photo taken of him, there was something missing, a smile that never reached his eyes. He had built a world of success, but lived in its coldest corner. Every morning he'd sit in his office, staring at the skyline that used to scare him, now conquered but hollow. Assistants rushed in and out, deals were made, fortunes moved, yet he felt strangely disconnected, as if he were watching his own life from behind glass. When the city quieted at night, he sometimes caught his reflection and thought, was this the dream? Or the punishment? And deep down, the ghost of her name still whispered through the silence. Lydia Daniel began to use his wealth differently. He donated to schools, hospitals, orphanages, always quietly, without press or praise. People called him generous, but few knew the truth. He wasn't trying to buy gratitude. He was trying to feel something real again. Each time he helped someone, it filled the emptiness for a few moments, but only moments. One evening, while signing a charity check, he noticed the date. Exactly 40 years since the day she left. His hand paused, pen trembling slightly. He leaned back in his chair, remembering her laughter, her perfume, the way sunlight once hit her hair. Then, like a cruel trick, the memory twisted, turning warm love into cold betrayal. He closed his eyes, whispering, "I wonder if she ever thinks of me." Outside, rain began to fall. Just like that morning long ago, it started as whispers, news articles, business columns, financial reports. Thompson Industries declares bankruptcy. CEO under investigation. The name hit Daniel like a forgotten bell. Lydia's husband, the man she'd chosen, was losing everything. He tried to stay indifferent, but the curiosity gnawed at him. Late one night, he searched their names online, scrolling through headlines and photos. The empire they built together was collapsing. Lydia's once perfect smile in those pictures looked strained, her eyes hollow. Daniel stared at the screen, his heart pounding slowly. Was it karma or coincidence? He turned off the computer, but the image of her stayed burned behind his eyelids, broken, desperate, a shadow of the woman who once walked away. And he knew fate wasn't finished with them yet. Lydia's mornings used to begin with sunlight spilling across marble floors and the scent of roses from her balcony garden. But now, even the light felt harsh. Her husband, Richard, paced the study like a trapped wolf, shouting into his phone, words sharp enough to cut through the silence. "It's not my fault." He snapped. The investors backed out. Lydia watched from the doorway. His voice no longer sounded confident, only desperate. The walls of their mansion, once filled with laughter and music, now echoed with arguments and slammed doors. Her friends had stopped visiting. The smiles at the dinner table had vanished. One night, she touched the diamond necklace Daniel once said she didn't need. The jewel sparkled faintly under the dim lamp, cold and lifeless. Something inside her whispered, "It's all slipping away." And she finally believed it. Weeks later, the inevitable came. Richard's company collapsed under fraud accusations. Their mansion was surrounded by reporters. Flashes of cameras lit up the night like lightning. Lydia hid behind the curtains, watching her husband handcuffed, shouting at the officers as they led him away. "You said we were untouchable?" She screamed as he was shoved into the police car, but he didn't even look back. The neighbors whispered, the staff left, and the house grew quiet, too quiet. She wandered through the empty halls in her silk robe, trailing her fingers along the walls that once shimmered with wealth. The mirrors reflected her face, older, tired, eyes red from sleepless nights. The woman who once had everything now had nothing but memories and silence. And as she sank to the floor, tears dripping onto the marble, the question echoed in her mind, where did I go wrong? Days turned to weeks, and Lydia's world turned gray. She sold her jewelry piece by piece. First the bracelets, then the necklaces, finally her wedding ring. Each sale felt like losing a part of her soul. She moved into a small apartment downtown, the sound of sirens replacing the music of violins. At night, she sat by the window, clutching a cup of cheap coffee, staring at the city lights below. Once, she had looked down on those lights as if she were above them. Now she was just one of them. Hunger crept into her bones. Loneliness became her only friend. Then one night, while flipping through an old newspaper, she froze. A headline caught her eye. Daniel Reed, the mechanic who became a billionaire. The coffee cup slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Her heart whispered, trembling, "It can't be him." "Can it?" Lydia couldn't stop staring at the newspaper. The print blurred as her eyes filled with tears. The picture showed a man in a dark suit, standing in front of shining cars and tall glass towers, confident, calm, powerful. His face had changed, older, sharper, more controlled, but she knew those eyes. Daniel Reed. The name that once belonged to a dreamer she had left behind now belonged to a man the world called the Empire Builder. She felt the air leave her lungs. Memories she had buried for decades clawed their way back. His laughter, his kindness, his last look when she walked away. The paper slipped from her fingers and floated to the floor. Her heart whispered, "He made it?" Without me. And for the first time in 40 years, Lydia truly felt poor. Days turned into sleepless nights. Lydia couldn't escape his image. Every headline, every magazine cover, every billboard seemed to carry his shadow. She found herself walking past his company's headquarters more than once, pretending it was by accident. Through the tall glass doors, she saw people moving like clockwork, efficient, proud, and under his name. One afternoon, she stood across the street watching as he stepped out of a black car. He looked calm, untouchable. A young assistant opened the door for him. Cameras flashed. He smiled for them, the same smile she once thought belonged only to her. Lydia felt her knees weaken, a mix of awe and shame twisting inside her. "He doesn't even know I exist," she whispered. And yet she couldn't look away, because deep down a voice whispered, "Maybe fate is giving you one last chance." That night, Lydia couldn't sleep. The sound of the rain against the window took her back to the day she left him. The same rain, the same guilt. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her trembling hands. What would I even say? She muttered to herself. Would he hate me? Would he remember? She tried to imagine his voice, his reaction, but the thoughts only made her chest ache. Then, slowly, she reached for her phone. Searching his company's number, she whispered, "Just one call. Just to hear his voice." But as the line rang, her courage faltered. She hung up before anyone could answer, her heart racing like thunder. Still, she knew she couldn't hide forever. Somewhere inside, the decision had already been made. She would go see him. The morning she decided to go, the sky was pale and washed out, the color of old paper. Lydia stood before the mirror in her small apartment, staring at a face that time had carved with regret. Her hair, once golden and full, now showed streaks of silver. Her eyes, once proud, looked tired, uncertain. She dabbed on a touch of lipstick, her hands trembling slightly. It wasn't vanity. It was armor. "I'm not going to beg," she whispered to her reflection. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her outside. The city buzzed with life, cars honking, people hurrying, laughter echoing from the streets below. She stepped into the crowd, clutching her old purse, moving toward the towering glass building that bore his name, Reed Industries. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the pavement itself wanted her to turn back. When she finally reached the front entrance, the glass doors reflected her image, small, fragile, lost in a sea of luxury. Inside, the lobby gleamed like a palace. Polished floors, soft jazz music, employees moving with purpose. A young receptionist looked up and smiled politely. "Good morning, ma'am. Do you have an appointment?" Lydia froze. The words sliced through her like ice. Appointment? How do you schedule a meeting with your past? I don't, she stammered softly, clutching her purse tighter. I used to know Mr. Reed. The receptionist's smile faltered slightly, eyes flicking over Lydia's worn coat and trembling voice. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Mr. Reed is very busy." "Do you know what this is regarding?" Lydia hesitated. "It's personal," she said quietly, eyes glistening. The receptionist nodded gently and picked up the phone. As she whispered into the receiver, Lydia's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the soft music anymore. Every second stretched like a lifetime. Finally, the young woman looked up and said, "Mr. Reed will see you now." For a moment, Lydia couldn't move. Her knees went weak. After 40 years of silence and shame, she was finally going to face him. But would he recognize her? Would he even care? An assistant led her down a long hallway of glass and gold, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The air smelled faintly of leather and expensive cologne. Along the walls hung photographs, awards, charity events, news articles celebrating Daniel's empire. Lydia slowed her pace, her eyes drawn to one picture in particular, a younger Daniel shaking hands with the mayor. His confident smile framed by flashing cameras. She reached out, touching the frame lightly. "You really did it," she whispered. "You became everything I thought you never could." The assistant stopped by a large oak door. "Mr. Reed is inside," he said politely, knocking once before opening it. Lydia's breath caught in her throat. The office was massive, wide windows revealing the city below, sunlight glinting off the skyline like molten glass. Behind a sleek black desk, Daniel sat, calm, composed. His back turned toward her as he finished a call. His voice, low and firm, carried through the air like an echo from another lifetime. "Yes, finalize the deal. We move forward at sunrise." He hung up, then turned slowly toward her. The years had changed him, but not beyond recognition. His face was sharper, his hair dusted with gray, but his eyes, those same deep eyes, still held that quiet fire. For a moment, he simply stared, studying her like a ghost he wasn't sure was real. "Lydia," he said finally, the name leaving his lips like a whisper pulled from ashes. Her lips trembled. "You remember me." He smiled faintly, though his eyes remained unreadable. "Some memories don't fade. They just..." Wait, the silence that followed was unbearable. The sound of the city below, the ticking of a clock on the wall, every noise felt amplified. She wanted to speak, but words refused to come. Her throat tightened. Tears pressed against the edges of her eyes. "Please," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Sit." Her legs obeyed before her mind did. As she sank into the chair, she felt like a child again, small, fragile, undeserving. He watched her, calm, distant. But there was a flicker in his eyes, something between pity and pain, the years, the choices, the heartbreak. All of it filled the room like invisible smoke. Lydia finally spoke, her voice shaking. "I don't even know where to begin." "Start anywhere," Daniel replied softly. She swallowed hard. "After I left you, I thought I was choosing happiness. I thought love couldn't survive without money." Her words cracked. And for a while, I believed I was right. We had everything, the house, the parties, the people. But it wasn't real, Daniel. It was all borrowed light. He said nothing, just listened, his expression unreadable. When it all fell apart, I realized what I'd done, who I'd hurt. You were the only person who ever believed in me. And I left you in the dark. Tears streamed down her face now. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed to tell you I was wrong. Daniel leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. His voice, when it came, was calm but heavy. 40 years, Lydia. 40 years I worked, fought, bled not to be rich, but to silence the voice that told me I couldn't make it. Do you know whose voice that was? She lowered her head. Mine. He nodded slowly. Yes. The room fell silent again. The weight of the years hung between them like a physical thing. Finally, Daniel stood and walked to the window. The sunlight framed him in gold. I used to dream of this moment, he said. But in my dreams, I wanted to make you regret it. I wanted you to see me and feel the pain I once felt. He turned back toward her, his expression softening. But now that you're here, I just feel tired. Lydia covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly. I don't blame you, she whispered. I destroyed something pure. I don't deserve even your words. He walked toward her, stopping just a few feet away. Maybe not, he said quietly. But I still remember who you were before the diamonds, before the lies. She looked up, eyes red and trembling. And who was that? He smiled faintly. The girl who made me believe I could be more than I was. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The clock ticked, the sunlight shifted, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly. Finally, Daniel said, "You came here for a reason, Lydia. Tell me. What is it that you want from me?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her heart was pounding too loud to think. The room seemed to shrink around her. I need help," she whispered finally. "I don't have anyone left?" Daniel studied her quietly. The same woman who once broke him now sat before him, trembling, humbled by time. He said nothing. Only the faint sound of rain against the window filled the silence. And as Lydia lowered her gaze, her tears fell onto the polished floor, one drop after another, echoing softly. Outside, the city lights flickered like old memories. Inside, two lives that once shared everything now stood on the edge of something far more dangerous: forgiveness. The office was quiet, too quiet. The ticking of the clock seemed louder than the hum of the city outside. The rain had started to fall harder now, running down the windows in streaks like tears on glass. Lydia sat in the chair, her hands clasped tightly together, afraid to look up. Daniel stood by the window, his reflection hovering beside the city lights, his face unreadable. 40 years? He said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. That's a long time to forget someone. Lydia swallowed hard. I never forgot you. He turned, his gaze sharp but calm. No. Then why did you vanish like I was nothing? Not a letter. Not a word. Just gone. She opened her mouth, but the words tangled in her throat. I thought I was doing what was best for both of us. I didn't want you to waste your life chasing someone who... He cut her off, his voice rising slightly. Someone who what, Lydia? Chose comfort over love? Luxury over loyalty? Her lips trembled. I was scared, Daniel. You had dreams, not security. He offered stability, and I thought that was love. Daniel laughed, a dry, bitter sound that didn't reach his eyes. Stability. That's what you called it. He moved closer, his shoes clicking softly on the marble floor. Do you know what I had the day you left? $37 in my pocket. I remember because I spent half of it on a bottle of whiskey that night, the only thing that didn't lie to me. Lydia looked up, her eyes glistening. I'm sorry. He stared at her for a long, hard second. No, Lydia, he said softly. You're not sorry. You're desperate. The rain outside hit harder now, the thunder rumbling like an echo of their hearts. Lydia flinched at his tone. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the storm, and the ghosts of what they once were. Daniel finally sighed, his shoulders dropping slightly. Why now, Lydia? Why come back after all these years? Her voice barely broke the silence. Because time ran out. And I wanted you to know, I never stopped loving you. His expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. He looked away, and for the first time, Lydia couldn't tell if he was holding back tears or rage. Daniel moved to his desk, pulling open a drawer. The soft creak echoed in the heavy air. He took out an old photograph, the edges yellowed, the surface slightly creased. He held it between his fingers like it might crumble. Do you remember this? He asked quietly, turning it toward her. Lydia gasped. It was a picture of them from decades ago, standing beside a rusty old car, laughing under the summer sun. She looked younger, full of hope. He was grinning, his arm around her shoulders, their eyes full of light. "I kept this," he said, his voice trembling just slightly. "Through every year, every deal, every lonely night. I used to look at it and tell myself that someday you'd regret leaving. That you'd see me not as the man you left behind, but as the man you should have stayed with." He placed the photo on the desk and stared at it. "But now that you're here, I don't feel victorious, Lydia. I feel hollow." Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "You have every right to hate me." Daniel's gaze lifted sharply. "And do you think that helps me? You think hate brings peace?" His voice cracked like thunder. "You broke something that can't be repaired." Lydia flinched. "I didn't mean—" "Don't," he interrupted, his tone low and dangerous. "Don't tell me you didn't mean it. You walked out knowing exactly what you were doing. You looked at me and you chose someone richer. You chose to destroy me." Her voice quivered. "I was young, foolish. I thought money could protect me from pain." He stepped closer until she could feel the heat of his breath. "And did it?" Her eyes filled with tears. "No, it just bought me loneliness." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel turned away again, his hands trembling slightly. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I worked so hard to prove you wrong, Lydia, but even after everything, I still dream about the night you left. I can still hear your footsteps fading away." The rain outside had turned to a downpour, lightning flashing against the glass. The room flickered with silver light, and in that brief flash, their faces looked like two strangers caught between past and present. Then the thunder came, loud, deep, shaking the walls. Lydia gasped softly, and Daniel finally met her eyes again. "Tell me the truth," he said. "Why did you really come back?" Lydia hesitated. Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked down at her hands, pale, trembling, fragile, as if searching for courage there. Then she took a shaky breath. "I came back," she whispered, "because I'm sick." Daniel froze. The storm outside seemed to pause with him. "I don't have much time left," she continued, her voice trembling like glass. "And when the doctors told me, I realized I didn't want to leave this world with your hate still haunting me. I've lost everything, the house, the money, my husband, even my son. I just wanted to see you once more." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "So now you come crawling back because death finally humbled you?" Lydia nodded slowly, tears falling down her cheeks. "Maybe that's true. But I didn't come here for pity, Daniel. I came here because you were the only man who ever truly loved me. And I needed you to know that before I go." Daniel turned away, walking back toward the window. His reflection shimmered in the glass, a man torn between vengeance and compassion. His hands were clenched at his sides. "You expect me to forgive you," he said finally. "Just like that?" "No," Lydia whispered. "I just want peace." The room was silent again. The storm outside began to calm, the thunder fading into the distance. Daniel stood still for a long time before speaking again. His voice, when it came, was quieter, almost broken. "Do you know what peace cost me, Lydia?" he said. 40 years of fighting ghosts that never left. You want peace now? But I paid for it with my soul." Lydia sobbed quietly, her face buried in her hands. "Then let me take the ghosts with me," she whispered. "Let me go knowing you're free." Daniel didn't answer. He stood there, his silhouette framed by the fading rainlight. his heart a battlefield of mercy and fury. Finally, he turned back toward her, eyes cold, yet glimmering with something human. "We'll see, Lydia," he said softly. "We'll see if ghosts can ever really die." The lights flickered once, a brief surge of darkness, and for a moment, the room felt like the past itself had returned. Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper. Inside, two souls faced the cruel weight of time, one seeking forgiveness, the other deciding if he could give it. The rain had finally stopped. Only the faint hum of the city remained, broken now and then by the distant hiss of tires on wet pavement. The clouds outside drifted apart slowly, letting slivers of pale sunlight touch the glass windows of Daniel's office. But inside, the air still felt heavy. Too quiet. Too still. Lydia sat motionless, her eyes red, her face pale. Daniel stood by the window, his reflection shimmering against the gold tint of the glass. He looked like a man carved out of stone, powerful but deeply fractured. The silence between them stretched on until it almost became unbearable. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice calm, almost too calm. "You say you came here for peace. You say you don't want pity. So tell me." He turned to face her slowly. "What would you do to earn forgiveness?" Lydia blinked. "Earn?" "Yes." His tone sharpened slightly. "Forgiveness isn't a gift, Lydia. It's a debt that has to be paid." Her breath hitched. "I'll do anything," she whispered. "Whatever it takes." Daniel studied her face carefully, the fine lines, the trembling lips, the guilt written in every movement. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes. He knew she meant it, but part of him, the part that had suffered, wanted her to feel what he once felt. He walked toward his desk, picked up a pen, and began to tap it softly against the polished surface. Each tap echoed like a heartbeat. "Anything," he repeated, his eyes never leaving hers. "Do you know how many times I've imagined this? You coming back, begging for forgiveness?" He smiled faintly, not kindly. "I used to dream about what I'd say, what I'd make you do." Lydia's hands tightened around the edge of the chair. "Daniel, please?" "I didn't come here to reopen old wounds." He leaned forward slightly. "That's the thing about wounds, Lydia. You can't heal them by pretending they're scars." A long pause. The air felt colder now, the faint hum of the ceiling lights buzzing like static. Then, suddenly, Daniel's expression softened. His voice lowered. "I'll make you an offer." Lydia looked up slowly. "An offer?" "Yes," he said. "You see, you've lost everything, that you have nowhere to go. I'll give you something: shelter, money, medical help. But in return..." He paused, the pen still tapping rhythmically. "You'll have to work for me." Her eyes widened. "Work for you?" He nodded. "As my assistant, here, in this building. Every day." The silence that followed was sharp as glass. Lydia stared at him, stunned. "Why would you want that?" He smiled, slow, cold, controlled. "Because if you truly want peace, Lydia, you'll face what you ran from." The clock on the wall ticked louder. Somewhere outside, thunder rumbled faintly again. Lydia whispered, "You want me near you? After everything I did?" Daniel's eyes darkened slightly. "No, Lydia. I want you near what you destroyed." Lydia stood slowly, her chair scraping softly against the floor. Her legs trembled. "You're not serious," she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Do I look like a man who jokes about 40 years of silence?" Her throat tightened. "You want me to walk these halls, surrounded by your success, the life I could have had? You want me to feel that every day?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The slight curve of his lips told her everything. She turned away, her hands shaking. That's cruel, Daniel. He nodded once. So is leaving me for someone who saw you as an accessory. Her breath caught. I was young. So was I, he said quietly. But I didn't let youth become an excuse. The tension was suffocating. The air between them buzzed like static before lightning. Lydia took a step closer to him, her voice breaking. And if I say no? Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. Then you walk out that door, Lydia, and whatever peace you're searching for dies with you. The words hit her like a slap. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The clock's ticking grew louder, almost deafening dot finally. She whispered, "And if I say yes?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, the faintest glimmer of something unreadable in his gaze. Then maybe, just maybe, I'll remember the woman I once loved, not the one who betrayed me. Lydia lowered her head, her shoulders trembling. You want me to work for the man I broke? Daniel's voice was soft but firm. No, Lydia, I want you to work for the man you created. That line cut through her like ice. She looked at him, really looked at him, and realized this wasn't about power or money anymore. It was about control, redemption, maybe even revenge disguised as mercy. The rain outside had stopped completely now, replaced by a strange, heavy silence. Lydia finally spoke. When do I start? Daniel's eyes glinted, the faintest trace of satisfaction crossing his face. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. She nodded slowly, defeated but strangely calm. All right. As she turned to leave, Daniel's voice stopped her. Lydia. She froze, looking back. He studied her for a long moment. Don't be late. Her lips parted, but no words came. She simply nodded and walked out, each step echoing down the long marble hallway like a countdown to something she couldn't yet see. Lydia stepped outside the building. The air smelled of wet pavement and city smoke. The sky was clearing now, streaks of gold breaking through the gray. She stood there for a moment, staring up at the tall glass tower that bore Daniel's name. It shimmered like a mirror of everything she'd lost. She could still feel his voice in her ears. Don't be late. As she walked toward the street, the memories came flooding back. The night she left him, the sound of his voice calling her name, the silence that followed. She had buried it all for decades, but now it was clawing its way back to the surface. A cab pulled up beside her. The driver leaned out. You need a ride, ma'am? Lydia nodded faintly, getting in. Home, she whispered. But even as she said it, she realized she didn't have one anymore. The city lights blurred through the raindrops on the window as the car moved away. Each light shimmered like a ghost of the past, flickering and fading dot inside her mind. Daniel's offer repeated like a haunting melody. Work for him. Face him. Earn peace. But something about his tone lingered, a hint of something darker. He wasn't just offering her a second chance. He was testing her or punishing her. Maybe both. As the cab disappeared into the city's maze, Lydia pressed her hand to her chest. Her heartbeat was uneven, her breath shallow. A strange chill ran through her, not from the weather, but from the realization that this was only the beginning. Daniel Reed, the man she once loved, the man she betrayed, had just opened the door not to forgiveness, but to judgment. And deep inside that towering glass building, behind the gold and silence, Daniel stood by the window, watching her fade into the crowd below. His reflection stared back at him, tired, haunted, unyielding. He whispered to himself, let's see if ghosts can work for the living. The city lights flickered once more, like the universe itself holding its breath. and then everything went dark. The next morning dawned gray and heavy with mist. The streets were slick with rain from the night before, the city moving sluggishly under pale light. Lydia stood outside Reed Industries, wrapped in a long coat that had seen better days. She felt smaller than ever before, dwarfed by the towering glass structure rising above her like a monument to her own mistakes. Inside the lobby, everything gleamed, marble floors, soft jazz, the faint scent of expensive perfume. People moved quickly, dressed in sharp suits, their voices low and confident. Lydia felt like an intruder, a ghost in someone else's world. The receptionist from the day before recognized her and offered a polite but hesitant smile. "Good morning, Miss Collins," she said softly. "Mr. Reed is expecting you." Lydia's heart skipped. Miss Collins. She hadn't been called that name in years. The sound of it stirred memories, some more most painful as she rode the elevator up. The soft hum of the machine filled the air. Each floor that passed felt like another layer of her old life falling away. Her reflection in the elevator's mirror stared back at her older, weaker but somehow braver than before. When the doors opened, Daniel's personal assistant, a young woman named Claire, greeted her. Claire's smile was tight, professional, but curious. "Mr. Reed asked me to show you to your desk," she said. "He's in a meeting but will speak with you shortly." They walked through a maze of glass offices and modern furniture until they reached a small desk by the window. "This will be your workspace," Claire said. "You'll handle his correspondence, schedule, and any requests he personally gives you." Lydia nodded quietly, placing her worn purse beside the chair. Her fingers brushed against the smooth wood of the desk. It was cold, impersonal. She could feel the weight of eyes on her, though no one said anything. Claire hesitated before walking away. "One more thing," she said softly. "He doesn't usually hire people without a reason. Just be careful, okay?" Lydia frowned slightly. "Careful?" Claire offered a faint, uneasy smile. "He remembers everything." The words lingered in the air long after she left as Lydia sat down. The sound of rain dripping faintly from the eaves outside mixed with the clicking of keyboards. She looked out the window. The city stretched endlessly below her. And for the first time in 40 years, she wondered if coming back had been the worst decision of her life. Daniel arrived just before noon. The office changed instantly. Whispers quieted, footsteps softened. People stood a little straighter. He moved through the room with calm authority, his expression unreadable. His eyes scanned everything and everyone until they found her. "Miss Collins," he said, voice smooth, detached. "I see you made it." Lydia stood immediately. "Yes, Mr. Reed." Something flickered in his gaze. Amusement, perhaps, or control. "Mr. Reed," he repeated, almost smiling. "I like that." He motioned toward his office. "Join me." Inside, the air was cooler, scented faintly of cedar and leather. Daniel stood behind his desk, arranging papers methodically. "I assume Claire told you your duties?" he said without looking up. "She did." "Good, you'll start with these," he said, sliding a folder toward her. "Contracts that need revision. I trust you can still read fine print?" Lydia took the folder, her hands trembling slightly. "Of course." He looked up finally, studying her face. "Nervous?" She hesitated. "A little." He leaned back, fingers steepled. "Don't be. You're not the first person who's worked here out of regret." Her eyes flickered up to meet his. "Regret?" He smiled thinly. "Yes, some people regret quitting. Others regret staying. You regret both, I imagine." She felt her throat tighten. Daniel, Mr. Reed, he corrected gently. Her lips parted, but she nodded. Mr. Reed. He gestured toward the door. Get started. And Lydia, his voice softened, but the edge remained. Try not to get lost in memories. We're building futures here. She turned to leave, clutching the folder to her chest. But as she reached the door, she heard him speak again, softly, like a ghost behind her. I'm watching to see if you still know what loyalty means. She froze, her heart pounding, but didn't turn around. The door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing like a warning. Back at her desk, Lydia opened the folder. Inside were dozens of contracts, complicated, dense, and handwritten notes in Daniel's sharp script. But among them, she noticed something strange. A small photo paper clipped to one-page dot. It was her. From decades ago. Standing beside Daniel in front of his old repair shop, smiling, carefree, alive. The edges of the photo were worn as if handled too many times. Her breath caught. Why would he still have this? Why would he put it here, hidden among the paperwork? Her hand shook as she slid the picture back into the folder. She looked up at the glass wall separating her from his office. Through the reflection, she could see him standing by the window again, staring out at the city, but his head turned slightly. And for a brief, chilling moment, Lydia could swear he was looking directly at her. The hours passed slowly. The rhythmic clicking of keyboards, the hum of printers, the low murmur of distant voices, all blurred together into a dull, haunting melody. Lydia worked quietly, her eyes burning from the endless lines of text. But every now and then, her gaze drifted back toward Daniel's office. He was always there, standing, pacing, writing, calm, focused, untouchable, every so often. He would glance her way, not speaking, not smiling, just watching Dot. By evening, the office began to empty. People said goodnight, lights dimmed, and the air grew still again. Lydia gathered her papers, preparing to leave, when Daniel's voice came from behind her. Stay a moment. She turned. He was standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes unreadable. I wanted to see how you handled your first day, he said. I did my best, she replied softly. I know. He walked closer, his footsteps deliberate. You always did try your best, even when it wasn't enough. She flinched slightly at the quiet sting in his words. Daniel stopped beside her desk, his gaze landing on the photo she had accidentally left peeking out from the folder. He picked it up gently. You found this. Lydia's voice trembled. You put it there. He smiled faintly. Maybe I did. Maybe I wanted to see if it still meant anything. It does, she said. Daniel's eyes darkened. Good, because memories have value. They remind us what betrayal cost. He placed the photo back on her desk and straightened. Be here at 7 tomorrow, he said. Earlier than the rest. 7? Yes, we start early when we're trying to rebuild trust. His tone was quiet, but every word carried weight. Lydia nodded. I'll be here. He paused for a long moment, studying her face, not cruelly, but deeply, as if searching for something lost inside her. Then he said softly, I wonder if you'll last a week. He walked away, leaving her alone in the dim office. The city outside was awash in gold light, the last rays of sunset fading into dusk. Lydia sat there, staring at the photo on her desk. The image blurred as tears filled her eyes. She whispered to herself, What are you doing to me, Daniel? Somewhere deep inside the building, a low hum echoed. Air vents, perhaps, or something else. It sounded almost like breathing Dot as Lydia finally stood to leave, Her reflection in the glass caught her off guard. For a moment, she thought she saw another figure standing behind her, tall, shadowed, watching. But when she turned, the room was empty. Only silence. Only ghosts. Only the weight of the past returning to life. The next day began before dawn. Lydia arrived early, the city still half asleep. Fog rolled low along the sidewalks, swallowing the street lamps in pale light. When she entered Reed Industries, the lobby was silent, only the echo of her shoes across the marble floor. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. As she stepped out onto Daniel's floor, she felt the change immediately. The air colder, the lights dimmer, the hum of the building deeper. On her desk lay a single envelope marked for L. She hesitated before opening it. Inside, a handwritten note in Daniel's sharp, elegant handwriting. You asked for peace. Earn it. Start with what you abandoned. Beneath the note was a list of archived files, all from decades earlier, the year she'd left him. Old business permits, receipts, unpaid loans, handwritten notes from Daniel's first company. Her stomach tightened. He was making her sift through the ashes of their shared past. Hours passed. She worked through yellowed pages that smelled faintly of dust and metal ink, each document a reminder of how little they had then, and how much he'd built without her. Every now and then she thought she heard footsteps behind her, but when she turned, there was nothing, only her reflection in the glass walls. When Daniel finally arrived, he said nothing. Just walked past her, glancing at the papers spread across her desk. Good, he murmured. You still remember how to clean up a mess. Lydia's voice was low. Is that what this is? He met her eyes briefly. The beginning of a test. By afternoon, he summoned her into his office. The blinds were half drawn, cutting sunlight into long, sharp stripes across the floor. Close the door, he said. She obeyed. On his desk lay a stack of letters, unopened, bound by an old ribbon. Daniel gestured toward them. Do you recognize these? She stepped closer, frowning. No, they're yours, he said quietly. Letters you wrote me before you left. I never read them. I kept them. Just in case. Her breath caught. You kept them all this time? Yes, and now I want you to read them. Her voice broke. Out loud? He nodded. She picked one up carefully, the paper brittle at the edges. Her voice trembled as she began. Daniel, I know you'll hate me for this, but I can't live like this anymore. The words sliced through the air like shards of glass. Each sentence felt heavier than the last, pulling her deeper into the moment she tried to forget. Daniel stood by the window, his back to her, listening in silence. When she finished the first letter, her hands were shaking. I can't read the rest, she whispered. He turned then, eyes dark but calm. You can. You will. She forced herself to continue. The room seemed to close in with every word. The hum of the air vents louder, the tick of the clock slower. Her voice cracked several times, but she didn't stop. When the last letter fell silent, Daniel walked toward her slowly. Now you've finally said what you never had the courage to say then. Lydia looked up at him, tears on her cheeks. Was that the test? He shook his head. That was only the first part. The second test came without warning. Late evening, most employees had gone home. Lydia was sorting documents when Daniel's voice came from his doorway. Come with me. She followed him down a narrow hallway to a private archive, a small, cold room lined with metal cabinets and the faint smell of paper and dust. Only one bulb flickered overhead. Daniel opened a drawer and pulled out a small black box. Inside lay a silver locket, old, tarnished, familiar. Lydia's breath stopped. That was mine. He nodded. You left it on the knitstand the night you left. She reached out slowly, her fingers trembling as they touched the metal. Inside the locket was a faded photograph. The two of them, smiling, young, invincible. Why show me this? She whispered. Daniel's voice was quiet, controlled. Because I want to see if you remember who you were before money mattered. Tears filled her eyes. I remember. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. Then prove it. Keep it with you. But every time you touch it, I want you to remember what it cost. She nodded weakly, clutching the locket to her chest. They stood in silence for a long moment, the only sound the hum of the fluorescent bulb. Then Daniel turned toward the door. Tomorrow, he said, you'll handle the employee evaluations. You'll decide who stays and who goes. Lydia frowned. That's your decision, not mine. He looked back at her, his eyes cold but gleaming. No, that's the next test. Let's see if the woman who once chose wealth over love can now choose justice over comfort. He walked away, leaving her in the dim light, the locket trembling in her hand. The air felt heavier now, pressing against her lungs. She realized what was happening. He wasn't just testing her skills or her endurance. He was testing her soul. When she finally returned to her desk, the building was empty. She sat in silence, the city glittering beyond the glass. The reflection of her face merged with Daniel's office in the background. Two ghosts trapped in the same frame. She whispered to herself, how many tests will it take until he lets me go? But deep down, she already knew the answer. He wasn't planning to let her go. Not yet. Not until the past had bled itself dry. Outside, lightning flashed again, illuminating the tower for a brief, blinding instant. And somewhere inside that light, it looked, just for a heartbeat, as though Daniel was watching her from the shadows. The sky over the city was black that evening, the kind of storm that seemed to crawl closer with every passing minute. Lydia sat at her desk, staring blankly at the pile of evaluation forms Daniel had assigned her. Each form held a name, a face, a future, and she was supposed to decide who stayed and who was fired. Her pen hovered over the first one, trembling slightly. I can't do this, she whispered to herself, but Daniel's voice echoed in her head. You once made a choice that destroyed someone's life. Make this one right. The storm outside grew louder, the rain hammering against the windows like angry fingers. The entire building seemed alive with static and shadows. When she finally walked into Daniel's office to deliver her decisions, she found him standing by the window, watching the lightning fork across the skyline. He didn't turn around when she entered. Have you finished? He asked quietly. Yes. Her voice was soft, almost lost under the rumble of thunder. But, Daniel, why are you doing this to me? He turned then, slowly, his expression unreadable. You think this is punishment? Lydia swallowed. Isn't it? No, he said, stepping closer. It's truth. For a moment, the only sound was the rain. Then he added, you wanted forgiveness. I want honesty. Let's see which one of us breaks first. His tone was calm, but beneath it, a storm darker than the one outside. The tension in the room thickened until Lydia could barely breathe. I've been honest, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I told you I left because I was scared. We were struggling. We had nothing. Daniel cut her off sharply. You left because he had money, Lydia. Because comfort mattered more than love. You didn't just break my heart. You taught me that kindness is weakness. His words landed like blows. She shook her head, tears starting to form. That's not fair. You don't know what it was like. I was tired, Daniel. Tired of being poor. Tired of watching you work yourself to death for dreams that never came true. Daniel's eyes hardened. And you thought the answer was to sell yourself to someone who could buy your silence. Her breath caught. I didn't sell myself. He took another step forward, his voice low, trembling slightly now. Didn't you? You wore his diamonds, lived in his mansion. While I was fixing engines in the rain, trying to keep from thinking about you. Lightning flashed behind him. Painting his face in silver and shadow, she turned away, covering her mouth as the tears spilled freely now. You don't understand. I regretted it every day, but I couldn't come back. I was ashamed. I thought you'd moved on. I didn't, he said quietly. Not really. Silence fell, heavy, suffocating. Then, without warning, Lydia's voice cracked into a sob. Do you want to know the truth? The real truth? Daniel didn't answer. She slammed her hands against the desk. He left me, Daniel. He threw me out like trash when he lost everything. And I thought I deserved it. Because of what I did to you. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked away, his reflection flickering in the glass. Then maybe you did. That was when she broke. With a trembling voice, she said, You're right. I did, but I also lost something you'll never get back, my soul. You made it, Daniel. You became everything I believed you couldn't, and every night I wished I'd stayed. Not for your money, not for your success, but for you. Her voice fell into silence. Outside, thunder cracked so loud it made the lights flicker. The glass windows rattled. Daniel's shoulders tensed. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he whispered, barely audible. Then why does it still hurt like you never left? The storm outside hit its peak. Rain streaked the windows, lightning slicing through the darkness. The room glowed white for a second, and in that flash, Lydia saw the man she once loved, not the one time had hardened. She stepped closer. Daniel, I never stopped loving you. He froze. Her hand trembled as she reached for his arm. I know I don't deserve to say that. I know I ruined everything. But you have to know, I left because I thought you'd never forgive me for holding you back. I was wrong. You didn't need money, Daniel. You needed faith. And I lost mine. He stared at her, eyes unreadable. The room felt smaller, quieter, though the thunder still rolled outside. Finally, he said, almost to himself, You loved me once. But you didn't fight for me. I'm fighting now, she whispered. Daniel turned toward the window again. His reflection stared back, a man torn between rage and mercy. Then, slowly, he said, Do you know what kept me alive all those years? The thought of you seeing me succeed. I wanted you to regret it. She nodded, voice trembling. I do. Every single day. The words seemed to break something inside him. He exhaled deeply, finally turning back to her. Then you've passed the test. Lydia blinked, stunned. What? I needed to hear the truth, he said softly. Not the pretty version. The real one. He stepped closer, his tone gentler now. You were right about one thing, money didn't heal me. It just gave me a bigger cage. But maybe hearing this helps me open the door. Lydia covered her face, sobbing. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. We're both ghosts, Lydia, but maybe ghosts can forgive too. He placed something on the desk, a sealed envelope, and walked past her toward the elevator. Daniel, what's this? She asked, her voice breaking. You didn't turn around. The end of your test. Open it tomorrow. The elevator door slid shut with a soft chime. Lydia stood there alone, her reflection fractured across the glass walls, lightning still flashing outside. She clutched the envelope to her chest, tears falling silently. For the first time in 40 years. She didn't feel like running. She just whispered to the empty room, "Please, let tomorrow bring peace." And as the storm began to fade, the city below shimmered with faint morning light, like hope, distant but alive. Part 1, the morning after the storm had finally passed, leaving behind a strange, heavy calm. Lydia sat by the window of her small apartment, the world outside washed in a pale gray glow. The city was still, like it was holding its breath. Drops of rain clung to the glass like tiny ghosts of the night before. She hadn't slept. The envelope lay on the table in front of her, white, clean, untouched, yet it seemed to pulse with something alive. She turned it over in her hands dozens of times through the night, afraid to open it, afraid of what waited inside. The silence was too much. Finally, she whispered, "All right, Daniel. I'll face it." She tore the seal carefully. Inside, there was no money, no contract, just a single handwritten letter, folded neatly. Her hand shook as she opened it. Daniel's handwriting flowed across the page, elegant and precise. She began to read. "Lydia, I could spend another 40 years trying to understand why you left, but the truth is, I don't need to anymore. You gave me the greatest lesson of my life, to never build my worth on someone else's approval. When you walked away, I thought you destroyed me, but maybe you saved me. The fire that burned after you left became the light that built everything I have now. And for that, I can't hate you anymore. I won't pretend I didn't want revenge. I did. For years, success was my weapon. But last night, I realized something. You weren't my enemy. You were my beginning. You once said I'd never be rich. You were wrong, but not in the way you think. I am rich, Lydia, not because of money, but because I finally learned how to forgive. Consider this your release." Lydia froze, eyes filling with tears. The words blurred, the ink bleeding as her tears fell onto the page. Her hands trembled so much she almost dropped it. "There's more," the letter continued. "I want you to come to the address below at sunset. There's one last thing I want to give you." At the bottom, in small, deliberate handwriting, he had written an address, a place she hadn't seen in decades. Her old neighborhood. The street where they first met. Her heart thudded painfully. "Why there?" she whispered to herself. Outside, a soft wind stirred, brushing the curtain against her arm like a ghostly touch. She looked down at the letter again, at that final line. "Come alone. I'll be waiting." And for the first time in years, Lydia smiled through her tears. The sun dipped low as Lydia walked down that familiar road, every step stirring a memory she thought she'd buried. The houses were smaller now, older, their paint cracked and faded. Kids played on the sidewalks, their laughter echoing like ghosts of a time long gone. She stopped in front of a small, run-down garage, the place where Daniel used to work when they were young. The sign above the door was faded, but still there, reads auto repair. The door was open. Inside, the air smelled faintly of oil and rain, exactly as it had all those years ago. Tools hung neatly on the wall. The faint hum of the city outside faded into silence, and there at the center of the room sat a small wooden table. On it was a single photograph, a black and white picture of them, young and smiling, grease stains on their clothes, the world still ahead of them. Next to it, a small box tied with a golden ribbon. Lydia's hands trembled as she approached. There was a note under the photo. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't say it face to face." Her eyes widened. "No," she whispered. The words on the page blurred as tears filled her eyes. "Don't be afraid. This isn't goodbye, it's peace. I left something for you in this box. It isn't gold or diamonds. It's something I kept for 40 years, even when I tried to hate you." Her fingers shook as she untied the ribbon and opened the box. Inside lay a small key, old silver, slightly rusted. Attached to it was a tag that read, "For the home that never was," she gasped softly, pressing the key against her lips as the realization sank in. It was the key to the house they had once dreamed of building. Together, the dream they never finished. She read the rest of the letter through blurred vision. "You can find the place at the edge of Willow Creek. I built it years ago, but never lived there. It's yours now, Lydia. Consider it a home for the life we lost." Her knees gave out. She dropped to the floor, sobbing, clutching the letter and the key against her chest. The room filled with the faint echo of rain, or maybe tears, falling onto the wooden floor. For the first time in 40 years, she didn't feel empty. She felt seen. That evening, under a sky streaked with orange and silver, Lydia drove toward the address Daniel had written. The road curved along quiet fields until she saw it, a small white cottage standing by a line of willow trees, their branches swaying gently in the fading light. Her breath caught. It looked just as he described it long ago, in those nights when dreams still felt possible. She stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath her shoes. The front door creaked slightly as she approached. She slipped the key into the lock. It turned easily, like it had been waiting for her all along. Inside, everything was still. Dust floated in the golden air, catching the last rays of the setting sun. On the fireplace mantel sat a single framed message written in Daniel's handwriting. "Love may leave, but forgiveness always finds its way home." Lydia sank onto the couch, staring at the firewood neatly stacked beside the hearth. She could almost hear Daniel's voice, calm, gentle, forgiving. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Daniel, for letting me come home." Outside, the wind rustled through the willows, carrying the sound of peace across the quiet land. And for the first time in her life, Lydia felt what Daniel had meant in his letter, what it meant to be truly rich, not in money, not in possessions, but in forgiveness. As the last light of sunset slipped through the window, she smiled softly, tears glistening on her cheeks, and the camera slowly pulled back from the house, its windows glowing faintly in the twilight, a warm, silent promise between two souls who had finally found their way back home. Weeks passed after that evening at the cottage. Lydia stayed there, almost afraid to leave, as if stepping away would wake her from a dream she had no strength to lose again. The house felt alive in its stillness. Every morning, light streamed through the lace curtains, dust motes dancing like soft sparks in the air. The willow branches brushed against the windows, whispering in the wind. Sometimes, she'd make tea and sit on the porch, watching the horizon slowly burn gold at sunrise. She began keeping Daniel's letters in a small wooden box on the table beside her bed. Every night, she read them aloud. Not because she wanted to remember the pain, but because his words made her feel less alone. His handwriting, steady and deliberate, carried warmth. Each line reminded her that forgiveness had weight, and yet, somehow it set you free. One morning, she received a parcel in the mail. No sender name, only a black wax seal shaped like an R. Her fingers trembled as she broke it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a folded newspaper clipping. The letter said, "If you're reading this, Lydia, then I've gone where work, anger, and regret no longer follow. Don't mourn me, just keep the house alive. Fill it with laughter again. That's how I'll know you truly forgave yourself." Beneath it, the newspaper clipping read, Daniel Reed, founder of Reed Industries, passes peacefully at home. Lydia froze. The paper slipped from her hands and fluttered to the floor. The wind outside shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain through the open window. For a long time, she didn't move, only listened to the creak of the house, the song of the willows, and the echo of a voice she'd loved in silence for 40 years. Finally, she whispered, "You kept your promise, Daniel. You waited for me to come home." A tear slid down her cheek, but her lips curved into a small, trembling smile. Spring arrived quietly. The air grew warmer, the fields around the cottage turning green again. Lydia spent her days tending to the garden Daniel had planted years ago, wildflowers, roses, and a single willow sapling he had once described as a tree that forgives, no matter how many storms it endures. She knelt in the soft soil, pulling weeds, her hands trembling slightly but steady with purpose. Each seed she placed into the earth felt like a prayer, not a sorrow, but of gratitude. Sometimes, at sunset, she would sit beneath that grown willow tree, holding Daniel's locket in her hand, the one he had given back to her during his test. Inside it was still that old photograph, faded, but the smiles were unmistakable. She talked to him softly, as though he were sitting beside her again, sleeves rolled up, eyes full of light. "I wish you could see this," she'd whisper. "The garden's beautiful now, peaceful, you'd like it." The branches would sway gently, casting moving shadows across the grass, and she could almost swear she heard his voice in the wind. "I do. Lydia, I do." She closed her eyes then, and for a moment, it felt like everything was forgiven. The years, the choices, the pain. Only love remained. Quiet, patient, unbroken. Years passed, but time was kind this time. Lydia grew older, her hair turning silver, her steps slower, yet her eyes held a calm brightness that hadn't been there before. The house remained her sanctuary, filled with the hum of peace. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she sat by the fireplace, reading Daniel's last letter once again. Her voice was soft, steady. "Don't mourn me. Just live." She smiled faintly and whispered, "I did, Daniel. I finally did." The fire crackled gently. Outside, the willows swayed under a sky painted in shades of amber and rose. She leaned back in her chair, her hands resting on the locket. Her breath slow and even, the camera would linger on her face, peaceful. Content before drifting toward the window, where twilight melted into starlight. Then a soft breeze slipped through the room, brushing against the curtains and turning the pages of Daniel's letters, one by one, until they all lay open, their words illuminated by the firelight. For a moment, the camera would catch the flicker of something, a silhouette by the willow tree outside. A tall figure, faint, smiling. Daniel. The light around him glowed softly. Not ghostly but warm, a memory made real for just an instant. He raised a hand, as if to say goodbye. And inside the cottage, Lydia's lips moved almost inaudibly. "Good night, my love." The breeze calmed. The fire dimmed to embers. The screen faded slowly to black. Then one last line appeared. She left him for wealth, but he left her with peace. And in the end, both found the richest thing of all, forgiveness. She came back when time had already taken most of what we were. 40 years had changed her face, her voice, even the way she looked at me. But not the regret in her eyes. We talked, we remembered, we forgave, though forgiveness came slow like dawn after a long storm. She said she thought I'd hate her forever. Truth is, I did for a while. But hate is heavy. It keeps you chained to the past. and I was tired of carrying that weight out in the end. I realized something she never did back then. Wealth isn't gold or houses or the power to make others small. It's peace. The kind that comes when you finally let go. She left me for a rich man. But life made me richer, not with money, but with silence, patience, and the strength to forgive. When I think of her now, I don't feel anger anymore. Just a quiet sadness and a strange kind of gratitude. Because if she never left, I'd never have learned what true richness really means.